everyone, I'm Noel, and I'm one of the very few people who had the experience of knowing Fabiola right from when she came to the United States up till the time of her death. One interesting episode in Fabiola's life, and there's going to be an anecdote that her brother and sister did not bring up, took place 1 month after she got to the United States. In Colombia, Fabiola did extensive volunteer work, including for an organization that had a worldwide presence. And when she got to the Los Angeles area, she contacted the local section of that organization. It so happened that the director of the Southwest region was Mexican and perfectly bilingual. So he took Fabiola on a Saturday morning to a conference at the University of Northridge, north of Los Angeles. He took Fabiola to a room where there was going to be a little conference, and he set her close to the door. The room was already pretty full. The conference started very quickly. Somebody spoke in English, a language Fabiola did not understand. And after a minute, another man came in, some kind of Chinese guy, maybe Vietnamese, and he started to speak in English. Fabiola couldn't understand anything, and she started to look around, and very quickly, she noticed to her left, a little bit ahead of her, a man who was in the extreme corner of the room, just in front of the speaker. Now, that dude looked about 30 years of age, and he seemed to be looking very strongly at the speaker, and he had a nice t-shirt, a pair of shorts, and he seemed like he had the legs of a soccer player. And Fabiola loved soccer. So, since she did not understand much of what was going on, she kept looking and looking at the man. And when the conference stopped, she figured that she just had to talk to that guy. Now, how to do that? She had never talked to a gringo in her life. She knew no English. All she knew is that she was close to the door and the man would have to walk by her before leaving. So she put her purse on her lap and started to rummage in there with both hands while people would leave the room. And she kept eyeing that white dude over there, who for whatever reason didn't seem in a hurry to leave. He just kept sitting there thinking. When the room was almost empty, the man stood up and started to walk out. And Fabiola started to worry, okay, now what do I do now? What do I do now? She didn't know what to do, but there's one thing she could do. When the man got about 1 meter in front of her, she suddenly whipped up her head and looked him up. To her surprise, the man stopped, and she was looking at her too. Their eyes met. Fabiola didn't know what to say. Her mouth was frozen in place, even though she was usually so talkative, as many of you know. Fortunately for her, the man slowly lifted his finger, pointed politely at the name tag on her chest, and said in very good Spanish, although with an accent, "You have the name of the Queen of Belgium." I'll spare you the details, but this is the moment at which Fabiola's destiny was sealed. She had spent 30 and some years of her life in Colombia, the land of Antonio Nariño, and she would spend 30 and some in the land of George Washington, Abraham Lincoln, and Martin Luther King. That's how things happen. An interesting detail that took place on that day was that at some point, Fabiola learned that the man was born in 1959, and she was afraid. She was born in 1954, and was the man going to not want anything with her because of the age difference? So Fabiola, as some of you know, did not mind playing with fire, even getting burned occasionally. So she told the man she was born in 1958. the man was not as dumb as he looked, so a few months later, what had to happen happened. He saw Fabiola's passport and noticed a 1954 birth date. And before he could say anything, Fabiola told him that, well, you know, third world, public servants who are indolent and dumb and careless. They gave me my passport just a few days before my appointment at the US Embassy to get my visa. And if I wanted to correct the administrative error, I could not have come to the United States when I wanted to. And now I'm afraid that if I start changing the date, I'll have trouble with immigration. Because if there's one passport that the immigration does not like in this country, it's the Colombian passport. But okay, maybe the Iraqi. Anyway, so till the end, the man would think that Fabiola was born in 1958. In fact, if you meet him, be very careful telling him that she was not born in 58. Ironically, she would learn later as they start to talk that when Fabiola told him that she was born in 58, the man did not like it. He liked older women. His criterion for dating a woman was that she had to be 5 years older than him. Otherwise, it didn't work out. So maybe this is why in the last few months of her life, as they were stitching their life together after being estranged for a few years, Fabiola kept telling him that he had no idea how good a woman he had married. Anyway, after the meeting of the eyes, things went very fast. Fabiola was in her late 30s, irrespective of what she said. The man was in his early 30s. They had been pretty unlucky in love, both of them, so they made up for the lost time. Within a couple of months, they were living together. Within a year, they wanted to get married, and there's another interesting anecdote on that one. Fabiola was a Roman Catholic, and the man was an atheist. Yes, there are a few atheists in the United States, even though they are pretty discreet. And he was going to a Unitarian Universalist church, which is one of the few religious havens for atheists. The church whose choir just sang The Spirit of Life a moment ago. Anyway, at some point, the man accepted grudgingly Fabiola's insistence to get married with the Catholic Church. The moment he grudgingly accepted, Fabiola started to run, looking for a priest and a church where they would get married. And that's when she learned that because the man was not a Catholic, and because they were living together and sharing the same bed, and doing whatever people who are in love do in those conditions, the Catholic Church could not give them a first-class marriage. They would get some second-rate ceremony. She spent some time looking for a liberal priest who would bend the rules but could not. Somebody suggested to her that the solution was very simple. All she had to do was to go to a Catholic priest and say that her Unitarian boyfriend wanted to make a donation to the Catholic Church to be saved, and ask how much the last Unitarian they saved have given her. Fabiola did not like the idea, and as she was desperate, the man told her, hey, how about if we check out my church? And for the first time, Fabiola was open to the idea that there are so many churches in this country. Well, Catholics don't commit a sin when they visit one, so why not? The man checked out what Unitarian Universalist church was in the neighborhood, found it, talked to the minister for a few minutes, and one Sunday they dressed up Fabiola and her husband, went to the church. There Fabiola got one of her biggest surprises in the United States. There was that minister starting a sermon, and the sermon was about homosexuality, a theme that is rarely broached in Catholic settings. Not only that, but the minister was saying that, well, there's a lot of discrimination against gays and lesbians. This is in 1991. We, the Unitarian Universalist congregations, are very open to these people, we welcome them, but we still don't do enough. Because there are people in this congregation who are homosexual and do not tell anybody. So he went preaching, saying that, well, we think we do what we have to do, but we still don't do enough. And Fabiola's jaw dropped further and further as the minister was preaching. To put it in its context, the country Fabiola came from, Colombia, was very unforgiving about homosexuality. And among other things, she had served as a phony girlfriend for a gay man who was being harassed by his family. So that by having Fabiola close to him, his parents and brothers and everybody else would leave him alone. So, well, a few weeks later, Fabiola got married in her husband's church. I have to apologize here. I don't know how many hours I thought about this speech, and when it came time to write it down, I just couldn't get it. So we'll see how it works. Fabiola's husband was an engineer, very good, very smart one, and he had a lot of responsibilities in a corporation. He was pretty devoted to his work, spending many hours and, well, getting occasionally frustrated and taking personally problems that did not have to happen. It seems after the fact that Fabiola was truly the man's second wife. The man's first wife was the corporation he worked for. And he tried to live as some kind of the soul of his corporation. And that showed at home. He would come at unpredictable hours. He would often be frustrated. He tried to keep to himself his professional problems, but it was not easy. And Fabiola learned somehow, at times the hard way, the job of being the second wife of a professional. The corporation the man worked for was less than well managed, and that would show in his relationship with Fabiola. Fortunately, Fabiola, quickly after getting married, got pregnant. Here again, the age trick served marvelously. Her husband was very risk adverse, so the idea of his wonderful wife becoming pregnant for the first time at age 37 would not have appealed to him at all. Neither would have the idea of having her second and last child at the age of 41. So the age trick allowed Fabiola to bear the two wonderful children that she wanted so much. I suppose I and other people can be grateful to her for that. The corporation the man worked for had its ups and downs. After a few years, there was a shake-up in the management, and the man started to come home happier. There was some common sense being injected from the top. People were doing their job better. He found himself spending less time correcting stupid mistakes and instead trying to give directions to people. He even had the feeling for a few years that even top managers were listening to him, and that his voice was important as to how to figure the direction the company was going. Fabiola, as the second wife, could notice that her husband was in better shape when he would come home. At times he would be, well, less moody. He would respect her more and the children too. Unfortunately, these things don't last. The corporation the man worked for degraded for whatever reason after a few years, to the point where he started working less there and spending more time home. That was not exactly good for Fabiola or the children, because his mood was not good at all when he got home. Finally, something interesting happened. The man was approached by a Japanese corporation who worked in that field and had heard of him. Coincidentally, the man had been so disgusted with the place he was working in that he was going to contact that same Japanese corporation. Great coincidence. So the man set a trap to the Japanese corporation. He told them that yes, he would gladly spend the day with them interviewing at their place. This was just some perk though. He would like to spend another day after the interview to visit the region, and he would take his wife with him. He didn't ask for anything, and he just waited for the reaction of the Japanese. And the Japanese did exactly what the man wanted. They told him, well, okay, we really look forward to talking to you, and we are going to get a plane ticket for your wife and an extra hotel night. And on top of it, we would like to have dinner with you and your wife. That was exactly the best the man had been hoping for. That a well-managed corporation who would hire a highly talented engineer would want to know who was the companion of that person. Well, Fabiola and her husband went. The man got interviewed at the Japanese corporation. It was one of the best days of his career. The Japanese had done their homework. They knew that technically he was at the top of his profession. They were worried that he had had trouble with his superiors in his company, and they asked him to talk about that. And when they heard the man's version of his problems with his superiors, the Japanese loved it. They saw that the guy was courageous, that he cared for the company, for the customers, and that he didn't mind risking being fired if things turned out too sour. It seems like they liked Fabiola very much too. So it looked like the man was going to get another first wife. And that's when the man got a little worried. The Japanese corporation would be a wonderful first wife. It looked like the perfect first wife. The guy would give his heart to the corporation, he would work there day and night, he would set directions, and he would love every moment of it. But there was a problem. What about Fabiola? How would she be in her role as a second wife? When would she see her husband? Would she stay alone with the children? So the man did not really tell Fabiola this much, but this one of the leading reasons why he did not jump into bed with the Japanese corporation, and eventually the deal did not last. However, there was still a big problem between the man's profession and Fabiola as his second wife. Eventually the man got an idea, and Fabiola agreed. He would quit his job and become an engineering consultant. An engineer who offers services to corporations and gets paid in return. The idea is don't get married, just have an affair, and when the affair is through, go have an affair with somebody else. It looked like a win-win. The man would probably be happy. He would also have the flexibility of working more or less, and the time he would spend with Fabiola and the children would also be more or less depending on whether he was making little or much more. It looked like a win-win. The man quit his job and became an independent engineer. And Fabiola loved it. It's just that Fabiola and also the man got another nasty surprise. He got very little consulting work, largely because he didn't look. And anybody who is self-employed in the room knows that when you're self-employed, you better make yourself known, otherwise very little business will come. So this is what happened to that man. He stayed pretty much home all the time, and Fabiola started to get upset about it. Fabiola being upset didn't help, but eventually she convinced him to get some psychological counseling, which the man did. The man found out that he was depressed, and that this would explain why he wasn't aggressively looking for work. While Fabiola was happy. That guy was a smart engineer, and he always said that once a problem had been formulated, the solution was close. Alas, that was not to be the case. They tried plenty of things to clear the depression of Fabiola's husband for a few years, and it would not work. It looked like a chronic condition. Fabiola may not have minded except for the economic part of it, since the man was earning very little money. Their savings dwindled. They started to take from their retirement money, And eventually they were lucky that the man's ancestors seemed to die exactly at the right time for the inheritance to come in. Something else happened that would all again shake Fabiola's marriage. Around 2006, 2007, the man discovered the conspiracy of 9/11. Not everybody is aware of the conspiracy of 9/11, but the main, I guess, part of it is the criminal controlled demolition of the Twin Towers. For those of you who are not familiar with it, all you have to do is look for a couple of minutes at the videos of the Twin Towers destruction. And it is quickly obvious that they could not possibly be caused by the impact of airplanes. The destruction is sudden. The steel frame of the Twin Towers is disintegrated in tens of thousands of pieces. The rest of the contents are pulverized. The destruction is complete and takes approximately 10 seconds. This is a technical feat that is scientifically impossible to realize with the impact of an airplane, even if it is driven by religious fanatics. In fact, the man, when he started to understand that, figured that as an engineer, he was really stupid to not have seen that earlier. He started to spend more and more time on 9/11, and that was fine with Fabiola. The man had done much volunteer work before, so had she. But things started to turn sour when the man was attacked by a death squad. The Latinos in this audience have some familiarity with the death squad, but many Anglos don't have a good knowledge of that. A death squad is a military unit, typically a combat patrol or maybe a platoon or a company, who operates under the command of a senior officer, major or colonel, and they operate clandestinely, which means that there's no record of what they do. The clandestinity of their operation allows them to violate the law and to ignore military regulations. In plain English, it opens the door to many abuses. And people who have lived in Latin America are very familiar with this process. South of the Rio Grande, anybody who opposes government policies can be disappeared, tortured, or executed by a death squad. In fact, one of the reasons Fabiola had left Colombia was that she herself had been threatened by Colombian death squads with disappearance and extrajudicial execution. Several of her companions actually took political refuge in other countries. So to Fabiola, to get her husband harassed by death squads was very scary. In fact, her worst fear was that someday the death squads may be attacking her children, which would be devastating. And indeed, on one day, Fabiola and the man's elder son, who was 14-year-old, was attacked by a US death squad. Fortunately, it appeared that this was unrelated to his father's activities. That young man, who was 14 years of age, had been reading dissident books on 9/11 in a bookstore and had been thinking about it. So it looks like the military personnel who bothered him just wanted to intimidate him in the hope that maybe he would stop thinking what a 14-year-old is not supposed to think. Anyway, this would put a new twist on Fabiola's marriage. But then her husband understood something. Since death squads in the United States supposedly do not exist, since there's so much political freedom to do just about anything here, the fact that those things existed for 9/11 taught him something. It meant that there was something behind 9/11 that was very important and precious, that the powers that be did not want to be exposed to the public. And the man decided to just look for it. So he kept working, studying the ins and outs of 9/11, looking for the key that would be so important to the community and possibly beyond. And Fabiola, needless to say, was worried. The man had encountered another first wife, and this time it was not a corporation. It was a passion for 9/11 truth. To her, that was pretty devastating. Not only was it personally dangerous, but it meant that the man would not bring much money to the table as long as he worked on that. And indeed, that's pretty much the way it happened. The man told Fabiola a few times that he had made a breakthrough, that he had found the key of 9/11. But then there was a problem. People would not pay attention to what he had to say. It was in the last few weeks of her life that Fabiola was happy to hear that the man had understood why it was so difficult to teach the specifics and the fundamentals of 9/11. So she may have gone to her and thinking that, hey, maybe this time he knows what he's doing. Which brings us to the end of Fabiola. One of the things Fabiola did in the last few years as she was increasingly frustrated with her marriage was looking for solace somewhere else. And she found a very special church whose pastor, Jorge Torres, spoke here a while ago. And it became her spiritual home. Her husband used to say that what really attracted her in the church was the fact that it had been founded by Colombians, and she would hang around with Colombians in the church. Fabiola would get mad, and she would reply that no. What I like there is that they practice Christian prophecy, which brings me to a unique character of the Church of God Ministry of Jesus Christ International. One remarkable process of the church is that they have a certain number of practitioners who have the ability to give members and visitors a message who, according to them, comes from God and which is pretty accurate and pretty error-free. Fabiola had gone there, had received that Christian prophecy, and noticed that it seemed to be pretty much right on the mark. And that's why she kept going to that church. In 2011, Fabiola got increasingly sick in the summer, and her doctor didn't seem to be of much help. She couldn't sleep, she couldn't eat, she was aching, her mood was becoming bad. But her church gave her the prophecy that she would almost die, be saved at the last moment by human intervention, then be diagnosed with a terminal illness, and then finally be saved by God, by the prophecy. Fabiola did not tell her family about this, but indeed she got sicker and sicker. Finally, she went to a second doctor who told her that her symptoms could be caused by a single health problem, that it could be very serious, and that they urgently needed to do some endoscopy that her previous doctors did not want to do because it was useless and expensive. In the meantime, the second doctor gave Fabiola some warning that she could feel a certain number of symptoms at any time, and in case it would happen, she should check in the closest emergency room. Behold and behold, a few days later, Fabiola told her husband to take her quickly to the emergency room because she was exhibiting the symptoms. She got to the ER, she sat down in the window, gave her identity, and when she turned around, there was a medical team with a gurney waiting for her. As soon as she lay down, they gave her oxygen, asked her to confirm her blood type, and started to give her blood. Once she stabilized, they told her that she had initiated a heart attack and that she had been saved just in time. While she was at the hospital, they hurried to do some tests on her, and they did the endoscopy that had not been done previously. They found inside her stomach a tumor about the size of a small egg that had nothing to do there. They quickly scheduled a surgery. They removed the tumor, and since the tumor had been there for so long, they examined the linings of the stomach to find that there seemed to be a large number of cancerous spots all around her stomach that a surgeon could not possibly remove. The diagnostic of the doctors was that there was a terminal cancer that had been caught too late, and the patient would die within a certain number of months. So for the positivist in the room, I'm sorry, but you'll have to explain this with fertile imagination, coincidences, invention, bad faith, and we are only starting. A few days later, doctors gave Fabiola the diagnostic that she had a lethal cancer and would die. Fabiola remembered the prophecy of her church and told the doctor that, well, I'm sorry, but God has other plans for me. The doctor told her to get chemotherapy, a treatment by which she would be, well, poisoned, literally, in the hope that the cancer would die before her body would die. Fabiola refused the chemotherapy, saying that she had the promise of healing from God, and she had suffered enough. Well, I'm an old engineer. What I know of spirituality is very close to zero, but I can't help it. I just like to look at empirical data and use logic on it. So I formulated the theory that God took notice that he had promised healing to Fabiola. Fabiola had the choice to submit to the chemotherapy, in which case God would need a small miracle to get rid of the residual cancer. Or Fabiola could choose to forego the chemotherapy in case God would have to make a slightly larger miracle. Well, small or large miracle, it's about the same amount of work for God. So God made a note, okay, we need to go for the big miracle. A few months later, Fabiola noticed that she was doing much better. She had pretty much recovered from the surgery, and she went to a medical test to find out how the cancer had progressed. To the doctor's surprise, they could find no trace of the cancer. They did a few more tests, and as much as they looked, they couldn't find anything. At this point, Fabiola, who was, as some of you know, easy to get upset, told the doctor in his face that, well, who was he to determine that somebody would die? Only God could do that. And I propose that God took note that the doctor did not need to be treated that way by Fabiola. The doctor was very sad. He had a lot of remorse of telling Fabiola that she would die. He did not understand what went wrong. He would check his documents, his records, he would talk to his colleagues, he would go back to all the knowledge he had acquired in his school, and he did not understand what went wrong. All he could do was be happy that the patient somehow recovered and apologize to her. He did not need Fabiola to be hard on her. What he needed from Fabiola was understanding, compassion, and forgiveness, which he didn't get. So God took note that Fabiola could have been a little nicer to the doctor. Sometime later, Fabiola organized a celebration in her house, in the garden. She invited everybody from the church there. There was food, everybody had a good time, and they celebrated the miracle of Fabiola's healing, which had been announced and delivered. So I'll formulate the theory that God took note. Well, all those good people are celebrating, they are thankful, they are happy, and they are saying that I completed my promise. Okay, promise completed, case closed. Now you have to keep in mind that in order to keep his promise, God did not have to completely remove the cancer. All he had to do to keep his word was to reduce the cancer to some minute quantity so that A, Fabiola would not be bothered by it in any manner, and B, the doctors would be incapable of detecting it. If God accomplished this, he accomplished his promise. So once the promise was over, it stands to reason that there were still a few particles of cancer left and right inside Fabiola's body. And once freed from the divine promise, these little specks of cancer came back with a vengeance. In late summer of last year, Fabiola started to suffer, and it was quickly obvious that the cancer was back. And this time, there would be no mercy. Fabiola received a prophecy from her church, which she did not share with her close ones. And this time, the prophecy was a promise of perfect healing, which in plain language means that God has death as plan A, with the distribution of a high amount of grace at the time of death. And of course, plan B of perfect healing can be a miracle and God again saving Fabiola's life. But plan A was death. And this time, the doctors and God could be right simultaneously. Well, we all know the outcome of this, but what is most remarkable at the end is how the Church of God was helpful to Fabiola and her family. Starting in September, members of the church started to come to Fabiola's house just about every day. Coincidentally, the family ran out of money for several months. And those people would bring food, they would bring blankets, they would bring money, to the point that the man who did not care much for the church told his son who was going to the church that since those people were so good, there would always be money to buy gasoline to go to the church. And at that point, Fabiola discovered something that she had been doubting for a long time. Her husband put the human community and serving the human community above everything else. But she had been accusing him for a long time of putting himself above his family. She noticed as weeks went by that that was not the case. The man spent 1 or 2 months with $5 in his pocket in case he would be alone and have an emergency. Whatever money was in the house went to Fabiola and to the sons. He took nothing for himself. He didn't mind walking 2 hours to go to a store, pick up something for Fabiola, to save $1 or $2 in gas. And as Fabiola got weaker and weaker, she had a need to be taken care of more and more. Eventually the man found himself honoring Fabiola, serving Fabiola, obeying Fabiola. As you know, when somebody is very sick and wants something, you have to deliver it right away. And something strange happened. The man started to like it. And he fell back in love with the woman. Over the last few weeks, Fabiola became her husband's center of attention, something she had been very few times in the 20 years of marriage. The man fell back in love with a woman who did not look like she was born in 1958 or 1954. She looked like she was born in 1940. She could hardly walk from the bed to the sofa, to the restroom. She needed help for that, and the man was happy to help. In the last few days of her life, the man was day and night at the hospital, tending to her needs and feeling wonderful about it. So, the last part of Fabiola's prophecy is that at the time of her death, she was going to receive an unusually high amount of grace and love from God our Father. I'm not going to present you any empirical evidence that would support this theory. But since the theory I've formulated is consistent with all the empirical data in our possession, I submit that this is not a stupid conspiracy theory. So Fabiola, wonderful woman, rest in peace.